This week in the enterprise security news, Amazon EKS is getting a lot of updates in terms of security, likely because reInvent is taking place. TiVo Networks announces a new integration. A cloud security mapping startup comes out of Stealth. Recent funding announcements from Defense Storm, Go Secure, and Eclectic IQ, and more. Then we discuss the road to secure your organization with Ferruh Mavituna from Netsparker. And then we wrap up the show with a special roundtable discussion on cybersecurity and diversity featuring Jackie Abrams, Gabe Gumbs, Mandy Logan, and Susan Bosco. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Detecting and responding to threats in the cloud is harder than doing it on-prem. Even when you do have the visibility you need, legacy security workflows weren't designed for the speed and complexity of cloud environments. Cloud-native security solutions from ExtraHop are purpose-built to spot threats across the hybrid attack surface, provide detailed investigation steps, and help you automate response. Request your 30-day free trial at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. CyberArray for Teams was built to help organizations stay ahead of today's evolving threat landscape and to meet today's most difficult security challenges. Fortune 500 companies like Amgen, Booz Allen Hamilton, Plexus, CVP, Fannie Mae, and Vizio, small businesses worldwide, and several branches of the U.S. military use CyberArray for Teams to close the skill gaps that put their organizations at risk and to equip their workforce with the skills to defeat their security adversaries. CyberArray for Teams. Problem solved. Visit cyberarray.it/solved to solve your training problems. Can we continue to function without facts? Cybercriminals exploit the absence of facts, harming organizations through the easiest point of entry, email. No company should claim they can stop all phishing attacks. It's about having all the facts in seconds and reducing the time it takes to respond. It's minutes versus hours and the difference between a security incident and a breach. Greathorn. See through the dark. To learn more, go to securityweekly.com/Greathorn. Face it, your data is everywhere. No matter where your data lives or what tools you use, Imperva Data Security unifies compliance, security, and privacy needs for any data store while saving you time and money. Imperva finds threats before they become a compliance or security incident, and built-in automation empowers you to remediate quickly. Give your business confidence about what is happening with your data, where it's stored, and who's accessing it. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Imperva. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly, episode 209 for December 2nd, 2020. I am your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be back. I made it back alive, everybody.
Yes.
I'm all good.
Back from Mexico. No incidents to report, which is good.
No, none whatsoever. It was clean, smooth, clean.
And clean. Yeah, that's important. That's good. Lots of hand sanitizer. Mr. Adrian Sanabria is here with us. Adrian, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Totally in envy of that vacation. I need one myself.
Yes, very much so, especially after this year, right?
Indeed.
I do have some announcements to make. I would like to have if you would like to have all of your favorite Security Weekly content at your fingertips, learn about upcoming webcasts and technical training, or just wish you could hang out with the Security Weekly crew and community, visit securityweekly.com/subscribe, where you can sign up for our mailing list, join our community Discord server, and subscribe to all of the shows on the Security Weekly network. That's securityweekly.com/subscribe. Speaking of upcoming webcasts and technical trainings, you will learn how to build a risk-based vulnerability management program. That's actually today, sponsored by Canada Security. You'll also learn how to prevent phishing scams with Greathorn. That's coming up next week. And also how to move beyond vulnerability scan to vulnerability fixed with Vulcan.io. Visit securityweekly.com/webcasts to register today for these free webinars, or visit /on-demand for our previously recorded webcasts. On to the enterprise security news, which in this month of December is getting lighter and lighter, I find.
Well, last week was a short week, right?
Yeah, last week was
Thanksgiving. I was gone. I think half of Cyber Risk Alliance was gone.
Mm-hmm.
We only had maybe 2.5 days of work last week. So it was a little light, but man, Amazon, all kinds of AWS news in here this week.
And that is because of reInvent.
Yeah.
Which is
always
save
the
up.
week after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, all virtual, which I have not had a chance to attend, but I know some of the staff here has been attending. So,
and it's like a 3-week event, right? I mean,
they spread it out.
They're spreading it out over 3 weeks. So it'll, a lot of people are interested to see how that kind of spread out event looks, because everybody tries to do it in a day or a couple days packed, right?
Right.
No one's ever spread one out over a 3-week period, so it'll be interesting to see how well it does, how well it's attended. Maybe it's a better way to do it. I don't know. We'll find out.
We'll see. Adrian, sorry.
AWS reInvent is. I used to tell people, just to kind of get them going, that it was my favorite security conference. Because usually fully a third of it was security related stuff, the products they're releasing, the talks and stuff like that. But if you've never been to the physical conference, once we get back to that, if we ever get back to that, it's a sight to behold. It's definitely worth checking out.
That's really cool. Some funding announcements. Defense Storm has secured $12 million in a Series B raise. What is Defense Storm?
Yeah, so I was doing some research on this one because I was like, I haven't heard of these guys before. Adrian, our list keeps getting longer, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to update it after every ESW show, but it looks like these guys are a managed service offering focused on the banking industry, I think is where they're focused. Yeah, they're built for banking matters. And so it looks like a combination of some managed services focused on the banking industry to provide broad-based cybersecurity. It's really hard to understand exactly what that means, but when you look at their website, that's kind of what they talk about is providing this threat-ready active compliance team of cybersecurity and cyber compliance experts on a 24/7 basis.
So this is a really smart approach in terms of sales and marketing, going after one vertical and trying to do a really good job at doing a whole basket full of things for that one industry. Because what you're hoping for here is if you do a good job, you get that word of mouth, and you're really speaking to that particular industry. You're not trying to take a general product and shoehorn it into 7, 8, 12 different verticals. You're just focusing on that one, and that's a great way to grow initially for a company.
Yeah, when I was doing consulting in the very, very early days, the vertical we focused on was credit unions and small banks, because they had the requirement to have security, but weren't necessarily engaged with a larger organizations to get their security done. So as a smaller independent firm, we focused on those verticals through partners and things like that as well. And they have
you
got
you could speak their language. You knew their acronyms.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The compliance was there as a driver, as well as securing people's money. So and it sounds like Defense Storm is focused on that same vertical.
Exactly.
Probably has a lot of credit unions and smaller banks, and
Yeah, because we know the large banks have
their own teams,
money and the resources to build their own teams out, but the small regional banks and the credit unions don't. So kind of a smart play here to go after that niche of the market, build very focused solutions, focus there, and call it a day.
Absolutely.
The banking regulations are far and vast and ever changing. So there's plenty of work to do in that space.
Absolutely. What else? Eclectic IQ raises $20 million to expand its portfolio and increase its global footprint. And I don't know if this is $20 million or 20 million euros.
I think
24
20 million euros.
24 million.
Euros,
Yeah. 20 million euros, $24 million in a Series C funding.
Yeah, and I guess these are kind of like they're the threat intelligence platform, integration platform is what it looks like they're doing. So they're competing with, kind of the recorded futures and some of those other threat plays that are out there that are aggregating threat intelligence from various places, making it more actionable. That looks like where their niche is in this space. I know I've talked to them in the past. They're not a sponsor, but I have talked to them in the past. So good to see that they're getting some money, and then maybe they'll do some marketing too.
Yeah, right? We can only hope. What else? There was another funding. GoSecure raised $35 million to get. What is GoSecure? I didn't look into this one.
I did. GoSecure is a managed detection and response provider, so an MDR. Yeah, Adrian, I'm curious on this space with you for a second, right? Because I mean, MDRs popping up, and it's really interesting to me, kind of how they're starting to displace some of these MSSPs with these MDR type services. These guys are very antivirus, endpoint. They do network detection and response, so they have a broader portfolio. But a lot of these MDR started with EDR managed services, but have really taken a bite out of some of the MSSPs.
Mm.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of them use off-the-shelf software. Some of them have their own stuff. You see like a Red Canary, where they do a bit of both. They use an off-the-shelf EDR tool as a sensor to get the data, and then once they've got the data, they've got their own stuff that they use to get rid of the noise, enhance the signal, and really, I've always kind of seen it as a partial failure of the endpoint industry, because the alert fatigue problem isn't going away. Maybe we're slowly getting there, but certainly there's this huge demand for someone to come in and figure all that out for the company themselves, and to just offload that pain. Just tell me how much you need and get rid of this pain point for me.
Yeah, and it looks like these guys are doing kind of their own. They've got some interesting partnerships with like McAfee and Symantec, probably more front on the antivirus side, but it looks like they're kind of rolling their own endpoint detection agent here, but then integrated with some of the other solutions, because I don't see any EDRs. Like some of the MDRs, like you said, they'll use a CrowdStrike or a SentinelOne or something like that as the basis of their platform. It looks like here with GoSecure, they have their own endpoint agent that they're using themselves.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell in a lot of these because even if they are using something off the shelf, there's all kinds of reasons they might not want to mention who that is. In a lot of these cases, I don't really see a reason to roll your own. Maybe in a lot of these cases, they're using something like OS Query. They're using some kind of open source offering. You see a lot of that in these cases. They'll use Zeek, and they'll use Suricata and OS Query, and you pretty much have your XDR and EDR solutions open source and free rolled up there, where you can get started fairly inexpensively, and then build your own custom stuff around that, right?
Yeah. It's all about the analytics then at that point, right? You've got your sensors, now you got to build the brain.
Well, and that's it. Is what you're using isn't all that important. Getting the data is, and the pain point is in figuring out what to do with all that data.
Yes.
That's the secret sauce right there.
Yep, the $1 million question. I did see a trend this week where a lot of articles were talking about poisoning the supply chain, and in Docker and in various languages and frameworks like NPM. There was an article from Sonatype that was covering this, and a whole slew of other articles. I'm not sure if it stemmed from AWS reInvent, inventors making some announcements and releasing some research reports surrounding that, but I did see a lot of research that there's a huge uptick in poisoning the supply chain with Docker containers in various languages and frameworks, further proving that it's still a problem that we haven't really gotten our arms around completely.
And especially for vendors that are using open source projects as the basis of their offering, right? If you get poisoned into some of those open source projects and they're the foundation of your solution, what's the potential risk to your business under that scenario?
Right.
Yeah, to me, this is one of the scariest things in enterprise today, especially if you're using NPM, if you're using containers. A lot of companies are still struggling with the problem of getting a list of their assets and those assets dependencies and the dependencies of those dependencies, and that rabbit hole that you end up of dependency hell that you end up going down. Much less whether or not those dependencies are trustworthy, or if the owner of that WordPress plugin just decided to sell to somebody who's undercover state actor or something like that. These are things that we've been worried about and aware of for a while, but we still don't have great solutions for.
I think Java still remains prominent in the enterprise to build applications. It also suffers from this supply chain style attack. I think Python does have some usage, but I think where many organizations are, and at least are going, are JavaScript-based frameworks that rely on Node as the package manager to build these enterprise applications. More and more, I mean, Adrian, Matt, we talk about implementing React applications because it's one of the more popular ones. Vue is also up there on the list. But these are all, packaged either in containers or in cloud-native applications that rely on these external libraries in order to build a fully functioning front end for your application that works in web browsers and on mobile applications. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's become so popular is you can build an awesome interface. Most of the solutions we see actually from our security vendors, as an example, and others are built using some type of JavaScript framework, and under the covers they likely suffer from this problem in the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. We
talk
about this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
When you're a large enterprise and your vendor management spreadsheet has 35,000 rows in it, and that's not even covering dependencies. Those are direct relationships, not the indirect relationships.
Right.
It becomes, you feel the headache forming, even trying to think about how to take care of that problem.
Yeah, how do we know if it's Joe or Josephine's or both's GitHub repository that we're pulling in their library, and are they maintaining it or not? Have they passed the torch? Again, Adrian, go back to your comment. It is one of the most concerning things for me in enterprise security for specifically software applications. Absolutely.
And we're seeing solutions start to emerge trying to address aspects of this, right? Like SNCC's doing this from a dependency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great work in the library dependency and looking for the transient vulnerabilities in these packages. You've got this Lightspin's trying to do aspects of it with your cloud assets, because that's another piece of it, right? Accurix is doing aspects of this modeling and verification as part of your infrastructure's code as you're spinning this infrastructure up. So we're starting to see some interesting innovation in this space, but it's a big problem to tackle when you look at all the different components. You're looking at the infrastructure, you're looking at the containers, you're looking at the orchestrator, you're looking at the open source packages. It's a big, big problem to solve.
It is. You're right, man. When you compare that to things such as email security or endpoint security, those are almost easier problems to get your arms around when you dive into the whole DevOps toolchain set and process that could be unique for the 50 or 100 different applications you have as an enterprise. Starts to get really complex.
Yeah.
And there's two sides to that problem too, right? There's the stuff that you develop that you have full control over, and then that appliance that vendor gives you, and you don't know what's baked into it. And then we get into the topic of SBOMs, software bill of materials, and I can already hear some listeners flipping tables when that acronym comes up.
Yep. I want to transition a little bit into AWS. I wanted to start with kind of a fun one, in that AWS unveils Mac instances for Amazon's ECS platform. And these are not virtual. These are physical. They're physical systems. They're loading in, like truckloads of thousands of Mac Minis into Amazon's data centers. Which is,
and you have to, because it's tied to the hardware. It's tied to the firmware level, and it's very, very secure. But at the enterprise level, you've got these big, huge companies with these millions of dollars of investment into these apps that go into the App Store, and they all have to be built on a Mac Mini sitting on a desk somewhere, and it's kind of ridiculous,
I think the M1 chip is truly innovative, despite my concerns about compatibility. But the benchmarks and speed testing that I've seen is phenomenal. Even Windows running in virtualization on the M1 chip performs outstanding. And I really hope that's a picture or a glimpse into the things to come for modern computing. The SOC as your desktop or laptop processor, I think, is encouraging. I also think it's encouraging for open source too. Linux has run on ARM-based SOCs, since the beginning of time. So it's logical that if someone were to develop similar chips, that we'd have a lot more flexibility to do that, and maybe not be locked into a Mac Mini running in a data center, right?
I'm just wondering if they're like shipping these to all of their regions, or is there like one region where they're just literally stacking Mac Minis on top of each other with the biggest fridge?
So traditionally, when Amazon announces a new product like this, when you dig into the details, you'll find, okay, it's just going to be East and West, and like it's a couple regions to start with, but it depends on where the demand is. The demand might be, and this sounds like a bit of an experiment, because most of the companies that can benefit the most from this have already been feeling this pain for 10 years or more, and they've already got their own set up internally. So it'd have to be pretty compelling for them to throw that away and say, okay, we'll just go to AWS. So I would expect to find this only in a couple regions now.
It's interesting. The next article I found, 3 articles, all related to the topic of securing Amazon's EKS, and those announcements come from Aqua, Weaveworks, and one other one, Sysdig, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
So this is a huge story.
Yeah.
This is Amazon creating software. This is not a cloud service. This is them releasing their own distro for Kubernetes.
Yeah, I see that. I'll talk about the new Amazon EKS distro, EKSD. And this is from Weaveworks and other vendors that obviously were working with Amazon when they were developing this distribution, it sounds like.
Right. And I think here's what's interesting about the story, Adrian. I don't want to take your thunder if you're not going to here, but
take it.
I mean, an EKS distro that can run in your environment, but gives you a pathway to EKS services in AWS later. They're going after the hybrid environment, and I think this is a smart play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there have been signs of this for a while. Their partnerships with VMware, and their edge services, the Snowball and stuff like that, where you can take bits of the AWS stack and put it on premises. Sometimes temporarily, some components of that permanently. When Inspector came out, that was a big deal, that they let you run Inspector in your own data center and in your own environments. And that was, they played around with open sourcing some of this software for a while. So this has been something it's not a new concept for them. It's something that's been on their mind for a while.
The feedback I heard earlier in the year was it was expensive to run it in EKS in Amazon's cloud. And therefore, the companies would spin stuff up, and then they get their bill and be like, oh my God, and they kind of peel back and start doing things on premise. I think this is Amazon's obvious answer to that. To go, well, you don't have to necessarily run it in our cloud, but once you tie people to that platform, maybe they start to run pieces of it in Amazon's cloud.
Yeah, and I think it's because Kubernetes has become the de facto orchestrator.
It has.
Remember, this was not their first containerized service. It was ECS. They built their own custom containerized orchestration platform, is Amazon ECS. Kubernetes took off. They had to build an EKS equivalent for Kubernetes. To your point, Paul, probably doesn't run as efficiently because it's not their own proprietary. They've got to take the open source Kubernetes from Google.
Yep.
Build a whole platform capability around it.
Well, it runs well in Amazon's cloud, but it's not as connected to all of the other Amazon infrastructure and services as is ECS. And when I researched the differences between Amazon's EKS and Amazon's ECS, basically after reading a dozen articles or so, what I gleaned was EKS scales about 5, maybe 10 times more than ECS. It's totally a scalability thing. So if you don't have tens of thousands or millions of users, you're probably going to go with ECS and it's more integrated. Or if you're not, then EKS allows you to scale up a lot more. That's what I learned.
And this now allows enterprises to leverage a consistent Kubernetes distribution on-prem and in the cloud. So Weaveworks makes it brings it into their platform so that you can orchestrate it and bring that distro in. Then you have Aqua and Sysdig now providing capabilities to protect containers running in that EKS distro.
And another benefit here is Amazon is obsessive about removing complexity and attack surface from their software. When Amazon does software, this is just part of their process that they go through. And as an example, if you remember the named vulnerability Venom, that was a vulnerability in the Zen hypervisor a number of years ago, probably 5 or more years ago. that's what Amazon's EC2 was based on, was Zen, but the vulnerability didn't affect them. All the other cloud providers, Rackspace, everybody had to patch and had to reboot 100% of customer instances. And the thing was, the Venom vulnerability was in the virtual floppy controller within Zen. And years before this came out, Amazon was like, what do we need a virtual floppy controller for in the cloud? Let's tear that out of there, get that out of here. And so it didn't affect them because they had already stripped out all this additional attack surface, all this additional code in Zen that they didn't need. And they've long since forked from the open version of Zen and gotten rid of a lot of that cruft. So I would expect to see the same stuff, when they come out with their own Kubernetes distro, and when they come out with software, they have that mindset where they're going to remove any additional attack surface that they can. So that's an additional benefit of rolling with some Amazon software.
Let's see, where else do we want to go?
Oh,
that was a good series of stories. Ativo Networks and Sentinel-1. I like, having spent some time with Ativo Networks, obviously they're a sponsor. Their integrations, I think, with other endpoint security products is a really good play for them. That deception and Active Directory security components that they bring in conjunction with your endpoint security products, I think, is a great win. You can, lure people to a certain point and make sure your endpoint protection is giving you further telemetry and also further protection.
Yeah, and this one and the Malwarebytes one are both going after some of the credential attacks at the endpoint. You see that in the Ativo announcement. You also see it in the Malwarebytes announcement, where they're adding some brute force attack, credential stuffing attack capabilities onto their endpoint agent. I think as you see users moving remote, all these vendors are trying to figure out how to add some additional protections into their endpoint agents to protect against some of these potentially remotely exploitable attacks. And both of those had similar components to them.
Wait, there was something else. Oh, DF Labs. We haven't talked about DF Labs in a while. I like DF Labs. I like the product. I love the team and the product. Great stuff. And they have made a full SaaS cloud package that allows you to implement SOAR, which is great. I think it puts them in a better position in the market.
Well, it's interesting. They call it SaaS, but it's a cloud package.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was a little interesting, how they're packaging up to allow you to kind of stand up in the cloud. I don't know that it's a pure 100% SaaS-based offering, because when I hear the term package, I'm thinking, all right, I'm in Azure, I can spin it up in Azure environment and run it.
DIY SaaS is an oxymoron.
Right.
And
they're moving in the right direction, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Everything can't be on-prem, especially in this environment. So the ability to spin it up in cloud infrastructure makes a lot of sense. I just don't think that it's a multi-tenant SaaS-based offering.
Gotcha.
Yeah, SaaS suggests that you're offloading that maintenance and management piece, that the vendor's doing that for you, right?
Right. Also, it gives you a little more control in this instance as well, rather than having it fully SaaS-based.
Yeah, and maybe you want some of that flexibility in your SOAR. Maybe you don't want a multi-tenant SaaS-based application. I don't know. I haven't played with enough of these tools to kind of really know what are the limitations between a multi-tenant environment versus having full control of your own. There might be some advantages to that.
Yeah, and you've always got the folks that want to be able to run it themselves, so, pure SaaS company is always having those conversations, hey, can I run this in my environment? No, no, it's got to be us who runs it. Otherwise that breaks the whole model of, feature releases and all that. Yeah.
And,
our instance at Wallace, yeah.
Well, in our instance with our website hosting, you want it close to your other applications that you're integrated with. And in some cases, you just got to hope that they're in the same cloud provider that you are, or have a way to spin it up in your cloud provider so that it can work more seamlessly and be integrated in performant. If you don't have any of those options, you're kind of just at the mercy, right?
Yeah, I mean, we dealt with those issues for years when I was at Qualys.
Yeah.
People wanting to run it on-prem. How do you manage a SaaS platform on-prem? I mean, we used to literally ship a rack of hardware that was managed by the Qualys team for the at-customer installations, so that we could keep everything updated and centrally managed. But that that was a pretty big burden to box up a rack of gear and ship it to a customer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. There was just one last article. CyberMDX is integrating its healthcare security suite into Philips Cybersecurity Services. Of course, healthcare is under attack in a big way from ransomware in particular, largely because if you do manage to take out a hospital, they're likely to pay. I think that's the monetization method of de jure of attackers today. I was listening to some podcast and they were talking about that shift that they went from not completely, but they realized that stealing financial data directly wasn't as easy to monetize or didn't net them as much profit as it was to just ransomware, right? I'm already in the network, I'm just going to ransomware it rather than try and find the financials and then go sell them at the black market. I'm already in the network, might as well just get the money here. And that was the one of the things that's led to that ransomware being more prominent today than ever before.
Yeah, and if you think about the environment with all these critical medical device systems, and you have the ability to lock some of those up, I mean, this is health and safety. This is life,
especially
and death
with COVID
type of situation. Yeah,
which is kind of a really dreary thought, but yeah.
I mean, so this is a shift we've seen in attacker behavior. Pretty big one in the last couple of years, and I think we're almost a decade out from when Mandy popularized the APT term, advanced persistent threat, and of course what we'd advise is, hey, you're not that special. You're not being targeted by state-funded attackers. APT is not something you have to worry about. And at some point, after they tried opportunistic ransomware, and then they realized how much money they could get going after a single entity, and going after the whole company, all their systems. When they realized that could be a 5 or 6 digit or even 7 digit in some cases sum for them, all of a sudden it became worth it for them to be more advanced and, well, maybe not more advanced, but certainly more persistent. And we've seen that shift now, and some of those APT style behaviors that before previously we only associated with state-funded hackers. We're seeing filtering down into the more mundane, less advanced, less sophisticated criminal groups.
That will conclude the enterprise news for today. Stay tuned. Ferruh Mavituna from Netsparker coming up next.
Uptycs has built a platform for SQL-powered security analytics. Extending the OS query agent, Uptycs collects, aggregates, and analyzes a wide range of system data and makes that available to solve multiple security challenges. Their solution provides visibility across Linux, macOS, Windows, containers, and cloud workloads. Their customers are using the Uptycs platform for fleet visibility, intrusion detection, investigation, and audit and compliance. Visit securityweekly.com/Uptycs and be one of the first to see how they've mapped over 500 behavioral rules to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Data protection is a top priority with today's work-from-home workforce. However, current data loss prevention tools inadequately protect data in cloud or SaaS offerings from insider threats. Secure Circle automatically protects data as it leaves SaaS services such as GitHub, AWS, and Salesforce. The protection is transparent to users and works with any application to persistently protect data, even source code. Secure your data with Secure Circle's Zero Trust Data Protection. Begin your 30-day free trial by visiting securityweekly.com/Secure Circle. You want to get the right things done for your security program. Sounds simple, but what are the right things for you? What does done mean? And how are you going to get there? Rapid7 realizes more than anyone how hard this can be. While Rapid7's Insight platform offers you industry-leading vulnerability management and detection and response solutions, their focus is on understanding where you are so that they can help you get where you're going. Visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 to get started. Well, welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. A quick announcement before we get started. Scythe is offering a free Purple Team workshop where attendees get hands-on in an isolated enterprise environment for 3 hours. It's scheduled for December 9th, day before Security Weekly Unlocked. You can register for this free event the day before Unlocked at securityweekly.com/Purple-Team-SW. Scythe will also be presenting on a Purple Team topic at Unlocked on December 10th, and they've decided to offer 3 hours of training for free. How can you go wrong? This segment is sponsored by Netsparker. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Netsparker. Joining us is the Netsparker CEO, Mr. Ferruh Mavituna. Ferruh, welcome.
Hey, Paul.
Nice to have you back on the show. Today, discussing the road to secure your organization, which is very timely as I'm tackling some of these challenges right now in these steps, Ferruh. So it's awesome.
Good. Yeah. So, I thought it would be nice to talk about this huge kind of overwhelming challenge of, hey, we got tons of websites. Where do we start? What we do? And I thought, hey, why not just explain what we normally do with our customers, right? Like very high level approach that, being secure. And majority of the time, organizations already doing some of this, but I think it's really, conceptually talking about these 5 concrete steps to get there. It just helps a lot with that motion.
Yeah, and I typically struggle with step 1. It almost can be the most difficult step of discovering all of your assets. I mean, we talk about that not just in the web application context, but in other contexts as well across the organization. Discovering what you have, especially today, is super hard.
That's a very good point. So, actually, I want to talk about it because that's interesting. And also our own gameplay, playbook, and how we approach this is evolved quite a lot. Back in the day, I was more okay, now go ahead and discover. Now we realize it's more complex than that, right? In real world, and we are more talking and working with our customers, seeing different challenges, and we're constantly evolving, not only as product, but also how we help our customers to get there. Because what we do is not just here is your tool, go figure it out. We are there to, hey, look, here is the playbook. Here is how you can secure. Here is the thing that we learned from thousands of similar organizations. And let me help you to get there with best practice. So let's talk discovery in that sense. So what we observe more often, your immediate step getting into your application security in check is not you got to find all your applications, which is good. You need to know to secure. But in reality, what we realize, and it's kind of like a 0-day or advanced APT kind of conversation. So what we observe, you already know your top 20, maybe 30 websites that are mission critical, core to your business, etc. So again, just like, when organizations talk about, oh, I gotta be secure against 0 days, especially on the network security context, or, I'm worried about state-backed attacks, whatnot. We are like, look, just do your patch management first, then you can figure out your more advanced challenges.
Right.
But you're not even doing your one-on-one.
Yeah, apply security to what you know or can discover easily first that is probably critical to the business, right, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not patching your stuff, and I'm talking about all security, right? Web applications, network devices, software dependencies, all of that. That's most arguably one of the easiest piece of the puzzle and easiest to get hacked by, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not even doing that, you should be worrying about all these advanced problems. Because you got to start from that, easy to do, adds a lot of value. So similar story into discovery. So what you want to do getting started, you want to say, hey, look, this is my mission critical inventory. And possibly it's almost like top of your head, it, right? So kind of start from there. So let's say the first step is your discovery, right? And the second step is kind of obvious. You know which websites you need to be securing, and maybe you started with your mission criticals instead of going expensive on this and spending months, which you got to come back and do that anyway. But let's start with your mission critical, which takes us to the second, almost to, most obvious step. Okay, now you got to find vulnerabilities in them. Okay. And funny enough, finding vulnerabilities, providing you got a trusted, good, high quality tool, it's relatively easy, right? Because all you do a couple of configurations. The better the tool, you do less configurations generally. And then just run with it. There are some challenges. You might need to collect authentication details and stuff like that to have authenticated scans. But at the end of the day, you're just gonna run a scan, and now we are on the cloud and everything. It's like, hey, 8 hours, 10 hours, 24 hours at most, and you're 50 mission critical, or maybe you discovered everything. You're 500, 1,000 applications, all scans. So that's your step 2, kind of the obvious step. Now this is where things get quite interesting. And let's talk about that 1,000 web application kind of organization scenario. Okay, you scanned your 1,000, so you onboarded your 1,000 applications that exist and discovered or mission critical and the mix. Now you scanned all of them. Now, in all likelihood, you're looking at something like 8 to 10,000 issues, and these might be a variety of things, right? Low impact problems, informational issues, hardening, like best practice stuff, and actual vulnerabilities, critical, medium, and all that. And this is where we see a lot of organizations, they all come up until this point, they scan their assets, but then they got stuck. And I guess that's obvious, right? If you have 10,000 issues and 5 people to deal with 10,000 issues, what do you even do?
Right. That's the rub. You're right. You get through the first 2 steps, and then you're like, I have to actually do something about all of these, or not, but I at least have to have some response to them. Even if the response is, we're not going to fix that right now, you still have to go through the exercise of addressing them in some way, not doing something and realizing it is addressing it in some way. Maybe not the best way, but you've got limited resources, right? Let's say you don't have a team that's addressing vulnerabilities. Now you got to almost build some of that first in anticipation of what steps 1 and 2 are going to bring to the table.
Absolutely. And this is kind of where it gets into step 1, find your website. Step 2, scan your website. Step 3, draw the rest of the whole, right? Now it's your problem. And that's where we kind of, our vision, the product vision, the way we approach it is where we come in and say, look, this is going to be done better. It cannot be just, we got 10,000 issues, dump all these PDFs to either developers or security team. Well, security team cannot handle for sure. There's no organization with that kind of beefed up security team almost in the whole wide world. We've never seen one. So it has to end up with developers, and you cannot just dump stuff on developers. That never works. So this is where we kind of dissected this step into this is the third step, right? Address. So discover, detect, and address. So in address, there are like some very obvious problems. The first of all, you have like that 8,000, 10,000, whatever, very high number vulnerabilities. And there are like two immediate things about them. The first, most obvious thing, okay, how many of them are even real? Actual vulnerabilities rather than false positives. So that's you gotta fix that problem. And historically, and still, a lot of organizations stuck here because they immediately realized, look, there is no way we can go through thousands of issues and manually confirm whether they're real or not. So they only can do, okay, then pick your mission critical, pick top 50. That's pick something sizable, which is fine. That's how you get started. And this is what we are addressing, right? Like by developing our own technology of ability to kind of triage and automatically prove real vulnerabilities, we solve that problem. And that kind of changes the dynamic in there. So that is first, right? You got to deal with false positives. And if you are doing it manually, you're not going to win that battle. It's never, ever going to work. It's never, ever going to scale. Arguably, you will not even able to do it once.
Yeah.
It's just, again, very time-consuming, resource-consuming things.
I think if I were, and I have been presented with this problem, what I might do first is look at the vulnerabilities that are coming from my web servers and the frameworks that are most popular, if you're using Java or you're using Python or using some JavaScript framework, and then build secure, repeatable environments for developers to use. So I've got a standard Apache build, a standard Nginx build that takes care of like whole classes of vulnerabilities that the scanners might have found. Regardless of priority, I'm going to do hardened versions of my web servers and my application servers. I'm going to get the dev teams, maybe in my top 50, I like your suggestion, Ferruh, right? In my top 50 applications, then rescan those, hopefully reduce my attack surface and number of vulnerabilities by a pretty large percentage. 25 to 30% would be my goal in the first pass.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I mean, in practice, that's while that applicable and some organizations with the right maturity is getting there. And it's like, it's where you shift left kind of. And whether it's the code left or like hardening setup, Docker container kind of model. But like something actually came to me, when I was thinking about all of this, we keep talking about shift left. And I realized, look, if you are not anywhere, you cannot shift left. So to be able to shift left, you got to be starting from somewhere. And that's not left like that. You start from the middle, which is like you find vulnerabilities. And then you say, oh, in my 50 applications, just like you said, now I know what my map looks like. In my mission critical applications, I know the common problems. I've got like cross-site scriptings. I've got like dependency issues, and I've got all of these. And now your immediate reaction will be, okay, I got to fix this as quick as possible, so I'm not going to get hacked in between. And your second, now you are shifting like from where you are, which is like you're at the production scanning or like staging scanning. Now you say, okay, I gotta stop introducing these vulnerabilities and fix that the core, like you suggested. And that's why you're like, okay, let's shift left. And that's your long-term plan. And your short-term plan, I'm gonna get hacked today. Let me fix that.
Yeah, let's fix the immediate stuff. Yeah. Matt, sorry, did you have comments?
No, I mean, we went through the same challenge in device vulnerability management, right? I mean, this is the same cycle we went through in those days, right? You got to weave out the false positives because security wasn't fixing doing the patching. IT was, right? So you had to throw them over the fence, right? So we've seen the same problem. I'm curious, are we going through the same maturity, Ferruh, that we did on the device management side? So false positives out of the way. I'm going to predict your next step, which is some level of prioritization around criticality, and then maybe some level of automation. Are we going down the same path on the application side that we did on the device side?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you can even take it one step back and you say, oh, the way that we develop applications and the maturity and the processes that we build in, that was prior to security. And that's a similar world. Like, definitely earlier the industry is there, the faster we are here. And it's a very similar world. Like, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but to your point, think about vulnerability management. So we figured out vulnerability management kind of early on in network security device management mix But vulnerability management in web application security still sucks, for lack of a better word, because like tools don't play with each other. Like you cannot integrate stuff. Still stuff like very disorganized, non-correlated. And network security mostly fixed this by actually having a lot of big key players who not only play with each other, but mostly create an ecosystem internally where everything just works together in a nice platform. Right. And application security, we still don't have that.
Yeah.
And there are some motions in there, but like you're absolutely spot on. I would say we're almost like maybe 10 years behind on the maturity, scale, where, maybe 10 years later, we will say, just like network security, this is solved, this is solved, this is solved, which wasn't so 10 years ago. And now we can address these problems just like we did with network security back in the day.
That scares me a little bit, though, because we see the proliferation of applications and moving these applications into the cloud and other environments where this is going to become, I think, a very large issue that has to be addressed. And if we're 10 years behind, what does that mean for our application security over the next 10 years?
So this is actually, and I'm sure, you have experienced this as I have done. So go back to early 2000s, right? Or, where hacking, like the joke, like hack like those days. And I remember, hacking stuff, and it was ridiculously easy. On the network side, I mean, we would have one vulnerability, and that vulnerability wouldn't have been patched like for months in like production environments. You got no isolation, you got no firewalls. So the kind of world is my oyster. You got no hardening. A lot of systems are just like flat out vulnerable. Sometimes you will just scan, and like half of the stuff is public to the internet. Everything was broken almost. So I think that's what maybe 10 years ago application security was. So almost like 10 years behind of that network security world. And I think that's one of the challenges, right? As you identified, we so quickly and rapidly get into the application world, and at multiple fronts, like web services, microservices, APIs, and then all these SaaS businesses, and then the clouds. And companies are still moving to cloud very heavily now. The internal networks are, very, changing their shapes, and the industry is trying to catch up with that game. Also, we do as Netsparker, web application security scanning, we got a separate tech challenges. When we started, we were only scanning applications, and XML HTTP requests was a new thing. And today we are talking about like all the single page applications, JavaScript framework, like Vue.js kind of stuff. Now we are talking about HTTP2, so everything is rapidly changing. So technology not only needs to keep up with technological changes that we are supporting from the vendor point of view, but also you need to keep up with the actual lack of best practice on the application security development, right? We still seeing a lot of organizations got zero understanding of secure development process, which is mostly because of that. Because my go-to example nowadays, I ask people, look, have you ever seen, if you ask software developers, anyone, just pick random person and ask them, do you think you should be using source code repository? And every single one of them, without any exception, say yes, even if you're a single developer. So that's a very well-established best practice how you do software development. I think that's where we should be getting with application security when we talk about application security maturity. And my prediction, we got 10 years to get there, because that's like kind of seems to be how long it circulates. And you can apply to network security world. I'm like very sure, and you might come up with better examples than me possibly, how that maturity also happened in network security, where we take stuff granted today, but simply didn't exist 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think patch management is probably a good example on the network security side. 10, 20 years ago, if you asked them, well, what are you using for patch management? I don't know. It's some undefined process, or it's not automated. I think, especially in enterprises today, very much automated, and most have, if not all, have some solution for executing patch management.
And maybe that's the advantage in application security for a second, right? Because if we think about some of the automation in the CI/CD pipeline in the DevOps process today, maybe we can get there a little faster because
agreed.
some of that automation potentially exists, because the patch might not be the way we consider a patch in the network security or endpoint space. It might be, oh, I just need to pull the new latest package as part of my build, run it through the pipeline, boom, there it goes. We might have some underlying enhancements on the AppSec side that we didn't have back in the network security days.
Oh, I agree. I cannot remember the source, but I read a research a couple of months ago, and they were very correlating the fact that if you have a mature SDLC process, like not secure, just SDLC process, software development process with all the right pieces and the right motions and the culture in the team, introducing security to that, it's way easier than if you don't have that agile, mature SDLC process already in house, which obviously makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're already in that, and it's almost like adding a layer to that process. But if you don't have a process at all, now you gotta go so much to get there. And on that note, to be honest, a lot of organizations still don't have true agile and mature SDLC either. But it's definitely getting there because the same motions are happening.
Yeah, but you hit the nail on the head with the cultural changes and process changes that are required. I think it's not so much, in my opinion, the technology. It's changing your software process, right, to embody that agile and DevOps mindset, because it's more of a mindset than it is a particular piece of technology. So you have to change developer behavior, and as we know, getting people to change behavior is much more difficult.
No, that's definitely correct. And, you talk about, for example, the package management kind of stuff. There is even like technological advances in that, which again comes with like a more modern agile DevOps environments. Products like, I think Dependapod is one of them. They kind of automatically, that's an SCA kind of product. And, what you see is, I automatically detect this an out-of-date dependency, and I'm going to actually make the code changes necessary. You just need to kind of approve kind of workflow, right? Which makes, so automates a lot of that update process, but still leaves the finalization to the individual developers. But all you need to do kind of, hey, let's merge this.
Yeah, it's hard to get developers off of fixing bugs and writing new features and fixing something that is a dependency that is sheerly for security, or even better, going back and changing their development process, which requires developing software that will change your process. But now if I'm basically configuring Jenkins and rewriting my entire, software development chain, I'm not fixing bugs and writing new features. And I feel like a lot of organizations are in that struggle.
Yeah. So if you put it all together, you come to this problem of, okay, now I got vulnerabilities, and you said, where do we go? And that prediction is absolutely correct. So you got to figure out your false positives, right? And again, this is where we come in and say, look, we automatically confirm real vulnerabilities, right? And we will give you the proof. So your developer is not going to argue with you. They can look at the proof and say, oh yeah, this is my database information,
right,
which they wouldn't have known if this wasn't a real vulnerability. So that kind of puts you in a prioritization conversation. Now you can see which vulnerabilities are actionable, which is my second more important thing. So you first need to understand what is false positive, what is not, what is true positive, like a real vulnerability. And your second thing, is it actionable? So, and this again, kind of, some technologies like SAST truly suffers from that, because you can end up a report that says, oh, actually, we recently did some motions in that internally as well. You got, here's my 50 alerts about your source code, and these are vulnerabilities. And when you go through them, half of them not even actionable. It talks about something, but it's irrelevant. It doesn't even matter. Or
that code would never execute. I ran into that too. That code would never execute. Or I have that library and I never access that vulnerable function. So it's not actionable, to your point, Ferruh. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's even worse things look, this cannot be controlled by attacker because it's not coming from an attacker-controlled environment. This is a very solid information coming from my file system, which I do control, and attacker cannot. Which is by design kind of stuff. So you got to figure out like false positives and actionable stuff. And this is where our approach is, hey, here's the real vulnerabilities. Here is the severities. And this is your picture that you're going to get hacked today. Like no questions, no what ifs, no might happen. This is, this can happen right now because here is the proof. And once you figure that out automatically, which brings us to the next step, right? So, discover, detect, address. So in addressing, now, as we discussed, like developers need to address majority of these vulnerabilities. You cannot send false positives, so you got to fix that. With that model, we fix that. But now the next problem, hey, what are you going to do? Are you going to just have like 100 PDFs and just email them around, which what we used to do. So it's not that off, to be honest, and other organizations still do. But we are like, okay, let's learn from not only network security, but let's learn from all other industries, right? Like we got to automate this stuff. So this is where we build a workflow and we say, oh, vulnerabilities are coming in. And now based on these rules, and it can be severity, risk, a bunch of other things, now create tickets to the developers, but only do it. For example, one of the filters can say, do it only and only if it's a real vulnerability with no possibility of being false positive, without any human or manual intervention necessary. So that if you think about that, and the challenge with that, you still need to map owners of websites to websites, or you need to hook it up to your CI/CD so you can map it automatically from the source community to the actual developer. But once you do that, which is kind of an organizational challenge, but like more like a brute, it doesn't take much other than time. But once you do that, imagine that world, you find 10,000 vulnerabilities, 5,000 of them is severity medium or higher, so need to be fixed. And out of 5,000, you got like 3,000 or something very clearly proven with direct impact vulnerabilities. So we talk about cross-site scripting, RFI, LFI, command execution, that kind of stuff. And now imagine every single one of them at the point of finding on real time, create it as a ticket to your developer in their own environment that they get up every day and check their tickets. So just within their flow, no false positives. And once you unlock that, and that's what we do, and that's why it kind of changes the whole game, now you are talking about a scalable problem. Now you're not like just looking at 10,000 vulnerabilities. Now you're looking at actually actionable vulnerabilities that your developers are fixing at scale, rather than your security team bottleneck is trying to review, distribute, and all that mix.
Ferruh, can you differentiate an external vulnerability for something that's internet-facing versus an internal vulnerability? Sorry, Adrian.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we do this at the website group level, so you can do that because we know which websites are externally facing and which websites running through internal agents, for example. Right. So you can arbitrarily do it as like, hey, let me arrange groups, or you can in theory say, if it's going through an internal agent, it's an internal website. I mean, you can assume, not always correct, but you can assume that.
Sorry, Adrian.
Yeah. So lead in what you were saying earlier, Ferruh. Something I've struggled with quite a lot is, oftentimes you see security teams that don't have an AppSec expert. And it really doesn't make sense for them to be running the scans and them to be throwing the stuff over the wall and them supposedly trimming out the false positives and things like that. Have you seen, and does it make more sense to you, which I think it kind of does to me, for the whole scanning and remediation process to be managed within the development group, for them to have that AppSec expertise, that AppSec engineer within that group, or at least even if organizationally they work for the security team, they actually sit and work more full-time with the devs directly?
No, that's so let me explain. I mean, there are like multiple models, but one of the best practices that we observed are working quite well. So core security team in the global organization built the framework and like a service for their development teams to consume, right? So that's the first step. So once you have this global piece, like in our case, we built Netsparker Enterprise, And then we integrate with this single sign-on, privilege access management, whatever they have. We auto-provision their users. It's all automated. So you might have thousands of, 15,000 of developers. Like some of our customers have those numbers. And we auto-provision all of them. As they log in, they just auto-provisioned with the PAM integration and everything. So what they do, they build this and they say, okay, here's the training videos. Here is how it operates, and here is how it works, right? Now, here is the CI/CD plugins. And then one option is they say, okay, dear development teams, I launched this now internally within the company. Now, come to this wiki page or whatever, that internal training, maybe they might be booking there, like various models. Now, I will explain you how you can consume this. So you can use the API, you can integrate your CI/CD with these native plugins, or you can do this. And this is how it's going to work. And you can use these global workflows that we build it for you, which will only integrate true vulnerabilities with your workflows, with your ticketing systems. And so within that mix, if you have the resources, it's absolutely the best case scenario. You have a dedicated application security engineer. And this application security engineer's job is not just, oh, here's a vulnerability. It shouldn't be that person's job. It shouldn't be that person's job to say, oh, I'm going to review all the scanned vulnerabilities, whether they are real or not. That should be automated. Like if they are doing that, you are wasting such an expensive resource, such an expensive person to do kind of mundane task, right? But what they should be focusing on, okay, now I understand this vulnerability. Let me explain you risk from our product point of view, right? And then let me help you within our code base, what is the best way to address it? So at the end of the day, as a product, we can tell customers like what they should be doing at a high level. But when you're in a complex project, someone needs to jump in and say, hey, this is the best design from a security point of view. So we shouldn't be just like, oh, adding this filter here. Like, okay, maybe that's going to fix this one problem. But we've got to look,
Right.
we've got to be smarter about this, get to the root cause.
And that's really the concern is oftentimes the security team doesn't know the constraints. They don't know the context, around these vulnerabilities. It's just kind of a, hey, I'm just going to pester them weekly and can see if this has been fixed yet. And then you get a lot of that animosity that you see between security teams and other parts of the business is they want to get this off their checklist. They don't really care about the problems that I'm facing and the reason I can't fix this vulnerability overnight.
That's remind me of one of my one of the things that happened to me when I was a pen tester. So I remember one of the members on our pen testing team was suggesting a solution to a problem that we identified in an application security test. And I read it, and I'm coming from a development background. I'm like, you must be kidding, right? Like, if they were to implement this fix, they would possibly introduce 10 more vulnerabilities because your fix is like so complex from a development point of view. It makes no sense, right? Like, there is no way they will be doing your recommendation because it's possibly worse than what they have right now. And that's the disconnect, right? If you haven't done development or if you don't understand that mindset, if you're not within that team, understand the code base, you will be kind of talking from that, philosophical point of view sometimes. Oh, just fix it.
Yeah,
but people who is gonna fix it, it's not like just fix it. It's like so complex, and you got all these, QA process, bunch of other challenges, backward compatibilities,
Absolutely. Just implement that secrets vault, but that could change the logic for the application and break things. So, Ferruh, I wanted to thank you for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly today. I apologize, we're running a little over time. Our listeners can visit securityweekly.com/Netsparker. And also make sure you check out Netsparker at our Security Weekly Unlocked event on December 10th. Sven will be on an API panel, and Mark Shembri will be doing a demo with me that will air on the event. So, Ferruh, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paul.
Coming up next, a roundtable discussion on diversity in cybersecurity. Stay tuned.
Cybercriminals are opportunistically targeting industries that continue to operate full tilt during the coronavirus shutdowns, and their attacks have grown more sophisticated. Given this shifting landscape, taking the appropriate countermeasures becomes paramount. Mimecast Email Security 3.0 helps you evolve from a perimeter-based security strategy to one that is comprehensive and pervasive with cyber resiliency in mind. From the company that stops at nothing to block cyber threats, Mimecast is offering a fully featured 90-day web security service. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more.
Enterprises struggle to detect advanced attacks quickly and thoroughly as evolving threats continue to evade current security tools. Skillful threat detection starts with diverse, high-value security telemetry to run detections on. The Chronicle platform allows security teams to store and analyze petabytes of data in one place so that you can quickly apply powerful detection rules against all of your security data. Learn more about the Chronicle platform and the latest threat detection capabilities at securityweekly.com/Chronicle. Today's networks are changing fast, and employees, devices, and infrastructures are more distributed than ever. Gigamon Threat Insight is a cloud-native, high-velocity network detection and response solution that's purpose-built to enable you to get in front of this transformation. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gigamon.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. In this special segment, we're going to discuss diversity and security. But before I introduce our guests, I have a quick announcement. Security Weekly, in partnership with Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. This one-day virtual event wraps up with the 15th anniversary edition of Pulse Security Weekly live on YouTube. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock to view the agenda, register for free. Doug White actually is facilitating a diversity panel as part of Unlocked. But we have a couple of those guests with us today. So let me introduce our guests for this discussion. First, I'd like to welcome Jackie Abrams. She's the Vice President of Product at Domain Tools. Jackie, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Also, we have no stranger to the show, Gabe Gumbs. He's the Chief Innovation Officer at Spirion. Gabe, always a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine. Thanks for having me.
Also, no stranger to the show, Mandy Logan. She's the ambassador for mental health hackers. Welcome, Mandy.
Why, thank you. It's awesome to be here again.
And last but not least, Susan Bosco. She's the Associate Provost for Academic Affairs at Roger Williams University. Susan, welcome.
Thanks a lot. Great to be here.
I'm going to start with Susan. I introduced her last, but I want to start with her because I think part of diversity in security starts with diversity in academics. Mm-hmm. And I want to start, when I entered my undergraduate career as in 1988, I walked onto the campus of Case Western Reserve University as an undergrad in electrical engineering, and there was one woman in my class. I knew of two in the entire engineering program back then. So my question is, how are we doing on the academic side from a diversity perspective? Because I think that fuels the diversity on a broader scale in the industry. Are we making progress there? It has to be better than it was back then.
Absolutely. We now have, I would say, if we look at our engineering programs, we have probably about 25% women, and we've also added many female faculty as well. When we look at computer science, though, we still don't see as much representation as far as women. Now, if you shift over to information technologies, there are a lot more women getting degrees in those areas, so close to 40%. So that has changed a great deal. So we have that genesis, but where we end up with problems is moving from there through to the career and then expanding on that. So there's been a lot of progress from studying these topics, but we need to look at translating that into industry.
And that's where I want to transition, I think, a little bit to Jackie when it comes to one of the articles I put in the show notes for this section was an article Ann Johnson wrote December of last year, about a year ago. I worked with Ann at RSA Security. She's now overrunning the cybersecurity internally for Microsoft. Very well known. she says in that article, it says about 20% of women have penetrated into the industry. Jackie, so I'm curious, how has that increased in the last year? Is 20% the right number? I'm not quite sure. I've tried to find some different research topics on this, but is that 20% roughly still right?
So the 20% is roughly accurate. I mean, look, you'll get a bunch of different statistics from a bunch of different sources, but in reality, what we're looking at is that women only make up at most a quarter, a fifth of the workforce in cybersecurity, and that is not nearly enough. So even though that may be an accurate number today, it is certainly not the right number. One of the most valuable things in cybersecurity that we have is a diversity of perspectives, and that's because actors, threat actors, attackers, they are diverse. They're thinking of clever ways to get around our defenses, and we need different perspectives to help us be more responsive and to stay a step ahead. If we always look at things from the same angle, we're quite frankly going to fail. And it's hard enough to be a defender as it is. We can give ourselves every advantage, and we should be doing so by bringing in people with different viewpoints.
Yeah, I want to get there on how do we facilitate that in a little bit. But again, one of those, no, that's good. I mean, you set it up right. But a couple of the other articles I pull in talk about that diversity, right? And also making us more resilient. And this is where I want to, kind of get Gabe into the discussion. And Mandy, when we think about the aspects of, as we think about diversity of thought, diversity of people, other things in the environment, how does that help us be more resilient long-term? Because these articles tend to say, if we have higher diversity, both on the gender and the ethnicity side, we're more resilient. And we're better prepared as an organization.
You want to jump in here first, Mandy?
Andy?
Oh,
yeah, either
please
one.
Do.
Oh, no, I was saying if you can jump in.
I thought you said you wanted to. Sorry.
No, go for it.
Well, I absolutely believe that resilience is inherent in many people who have had to struggle. And I said I would come at this actually from a different angle because, say, for me, higher education was not within reach. There really was not a way to go that route. And so it is, I believe, imperative within the industry to recognize that there are a lot of roles that can be filled and that can be done very well without a specific bachelor's degree or master's degree or PhD degree, that there are many, many people who are very successful in cybersecurity and information security that do not have any background or access such as that. The resilience then, say, like from my background coming from rural Arizona, where we did not have internet at home, there was not access or even really knowing that cybersecurity existed. And yet it just dovetails so nicely with a lot of the things that you're trained as working in rural areas, working with wanting to do good, wanting to help people, wanting to be able to do something from your home that actually helps your own community. And with being able to work in cybersecurity, a lot of times remotely, being able to be self-guided in learning and in taking steps, I feel it absolutely draws in a resiliency to the workforce by allowing people from many broad and perhaps very poor or very disabled backgrounds to even know that cybersecurity exists as a possibility.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And so instead of trying to build on that, why don't I maybe add an analogy that I think our audience can appreciate? You wouldn't hire a penetration tester whose only experience was in attacking CGI websites from the early 2000s, right? You would equally want some diversity of skill sets. And so that same is true in terms of lived experiences. Those lived experiences allow us to look at problems from different angles, and as such approach them with different problems. It brings different empathy points as well too, which is just so incredibly important in understanding the challenges that we're trying to solve for.
Yeah, agreed. Now, as we think about in the Discord channel, there's some lively discussion actually going on right now. Adrian mentioned that when he was doing research about 10 years ago, about 10% women, now we're 20 to 25%. So we've made some progress. The question I want to pose to the panel, and I don't really care who starts first, but if are we making enough progress? I'll get to what we need to do, but in the last 10 years, if we've gone from 10 to 20 to 25, is that enough progress in this space? And then we can talk about maybe ways to improve that.
If I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll jump in because I came to information security in a roundabout way in more recent years. Previously, prior to having injuries that created greater disabilities, I worked in construction. I inspected commercial construction sites, and I worked with very large commercial contractors and governments and lawyers. And in what I did, it was 3% female. So when I entered into the hacker world and into InfoSec and cybersecurity, it actually was incredibly encouraging to me to see the 20 to 25% female and to see that I could attend and interact with communities online that were female focused, very accessible, or were non-gender focused whatsoever. And it was a beautiful thing to me to see the attitudes of the people present within this very new industry that do not have the same rigorous standards of that this is how it is and this is how it has always been. So I do think there's a lot to be said there, that it is significant to notice in 10 years there's a 10% increase. Think of in construction, it's been 100 years and there's been 2% increase.
Interesting.
Yeah. I kind of want to challenge the question, and I agree that we are making progress, and progress is good. But instead of asking, are we making progress or enough progress, are we making the right kinds of progress? You opened up by talking about access to education, for example. So are we making the right kind of progress in that area? Are we making the right kind of progress? And Mandy touched on in terms of having access to the right tools, right? So 14 million Americans don't have any internet access at all. 25 million don't have access to broadband. That covers both rural and inner city. In the inner cities, places like New York, 27% of households lack broadband altogether. 70% don't even have a computer in their home. So are we making the right kind of progress might be where I want to focus that question.
Gabe, I think that's a fantastic point, right? I started at academics. You're starting even before academics. I mean, we're talking, and I meant at the college level, right? The degree programs. I mean, you're going back even further to maybe the root cause of this is, do we have enough access to the internet and technology to actually embrace and enable children at the early stages to even want to take on careers in a science-based or computer or security discipline?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can speak from my own experiences. I was fortunate enough to have that type of access. At a very young age, I had that access, and I can draw a straight line from being immersed in that world and in those communities to where I am today. And so I can only imagine what it is like to not have that access. In fact, I can't imagine what it's like to not have that access. But I can certainly picture that if you are not exposed to these things at an early age, you can't see yourself being there in the future, or you start well behind the starting line, right? Someone who at the same age as I was when I was first exposed to technology, who didn't have technology, by the time we both get to college level, by that point, I will have already been far ahead than that person was in terms of understanding technology, using it, and all those things. So it certainly starts well before you even get to the higher levels of academia. And COVID's only exacerbating that problem now too. So if you have no internet access in the home, then that puts you further behind in terms of just traditional learning. And if you do have access, but maybe you don't have high-speed access, or you only have one computer share amongst multiple siblings, those things are all going to negatively contribute to this problem.
Well, I'd like to tie in together, I think what Gabe and Mandy might have been going on some of this. And I can tell you, as recently as my class that I am just finishing up now teaching this semester, I had probably a quarter of the students who consistently had issues trying to get on to classes the days I did remote learning with Zoom, where they couldn't use they didn't have enough broadband to use both their video and their audio. So this is not even, it's a problem that's continuing, I think, as you mentioned. So when you don't even have that access, one thing is you can't visualize, but the other is technology becomes such a frustration. You can't imagine wanting to be in an industry that deals with technology. And on the other hand, it's also that ability to see yourself in those fields. And in reading about the interest in IT and cybersecurity specifically, there seems to be such a lack of awareness of access, career path, and a question I have, because I'm not in this field specifically as you all are, is do you feel that the presence of women and different ethnic and racial groups is visible enough, considering the type of career and work that you do?
I can jump in there quickly. I would say no, it's not visible enough. While there are pathways for people to get involved, and there are groups, community groups, organizations, Black Girls Code is great. WISP does a lot of fantastic things. They're not necessarily highly visible throughout people's developmental stages when they are selecting their career path. I read an article recently that said that most women have ruled out cybersecurity as a potential job by the age of 15. First of all, I had no idea what I would end up doing when I was 15, and I certainly didn't think this. But the fact that people are having experiences with cybersecurity and enough to actually rule it out, that they think it's not a place for them, it's not welcoming, they can't learn it, they're intimidated, that's really a problem. And it's compounded by the fact that there aren't necessarily a lot of really easy pathways in for those who are looking to dip a toe in the water in cybersecurity and try it out. We propound this by our job descriptions, the requirements that we place upon experience for someone coming into a role, our desire to fill jobs with unicorns who can do everything, and don't pay them well on top of it. And we don't really have a path for someone who's entry level who needs to learn. We always seem to be wanting someone who can come in and do the job day one. And we need to really build up our mentorship starting from a very, very early age to make this viable and to bring people in and make it a welcoming community.
So, Jackie, I think that's a great transition point to talk about how do we fix this? Because you brought up a very good point around, young women have ruled it out by the age of 15. By the age of 15, I knew I wanted to be an electrical engineer. Now, somehow something was exposed to me that I knew that, but I'm not there anymore, right? I made a very interesting pivot and shift out of that, right? But I knew early on. So how do we get it visible earlier? I know that some of our folks have talked to high school students, but at 15, you're already in high school or right at that cusp, right, of getting through high school. Is that too late? And so my question is, how do we get it visible maybe for a little further back into the middle schools? What do we do as an industry to get our profession visible in a way that we can influence younger people at an earlier point before they make their career decisions?
If I may, I have a couple of ideas on that. First and foremost, I would say going back even before discussing having access to internet or having the equipment at home to look at this as a viable option, thinking back on my own journey from very young, I would say the single greatest thing that kept me from pursuing my passions and even things I had an aptitude for and that I would figure out how to get to was that literally the attitude that I perceived from the majority of professional people that what they did was brain surgery. the attitude that came across from white collar workers was far more detrimental to me being able to consider myself as being able to pursue this career. It really had nothing to do with, oh, I don't have a computer at home. Like, I would go use the lab at school. I could go to the library and I could read books. I was tenacious enough, and a lot of people who are underprivileged are, because we are used to having to do that to survive, that it was much more primal in the attitude that was perceived. So I could say right now, one thing would be that every single worker, while taking in pride and accomplishment in what they have done and their education and their work, is really stepping back on coming across to anyone as if what you do is so technical and so advanced that it becomes unattainable to someone like me, who was very young and impressionable. Otherwise, I would say as well, like, I think including CTFs at middle school level and at elementary school level, increasing the number of video games that reference and show the securing side of the technology, because there's so many people with a natural aptitude to want to do perhaps a law enforcement type career, and then understand, oh, maybe I don't have to go into the military or join the police academy. I can do that same type of securing the entire country and my neighborhood by learning cybersecurity. And it's incredibly simple to do it that way.
Mm-hmm. I don't
yeah,
know
Orange
the
County.
answer.
Go ahead, Gabe.
No, I was just saying, I don't know the answer on a larger scale, and I'm sure there's someone smarter than me that can figure it out. Someone mentioned, like, the Black Girls Code, that group, etc. But my own personal experience prior to being sent to our collective mole huts with this current plague, I would go to a couple of elementary schools a few times a year. One where a relative of mine works at. And I had a very personal experience there where I'm talking to the kids about my chosen profession, and just kind of talking about some of their own experiences with technology. And one kid in particular started walking me through a scenario where he had figured out how to exploit a video game in his library to get more lives and more gold, etc. And in his brain, he didn't put together the one-on-one of what I do with what he was doing, which is to say, the aspect of testing and breaking and hacking the system with just his joy for finding loopholes to playing the game more and further, right? And I think it's being able to help make those connections on a personal level, on a one-on-one level, that is very powerful. That obviously doesn't scale for one person, but I think what I'm getting at there is, it does take more than one person. It takes all of us reaching out where we can, when we can, to make those types of things possible.
Yeah, I went down earlier this year, right before the lockdowns, to Orange County, Florida. They do a CTF at the high school level. But Mandy, what you said is bringing that back into the middle school and the elementary. I don't know anybody that's bringing it that far back.
Really? You don't know anybody using like Pico CTF? Or, I mean, I've interacted with elementary school, and I've worked with a number of kids who are around 8 to 10 and go through over the wire or through Pico CTF. And they instantly start putting together like, oh, you mean I could do this? I could do this. Or they start learning about password managers, and they start telling their parents about this. They absolutely thrive on understanding it. And so even when I'm speaking with elementary age students, they have no barrier to understanding that it's needed. If they have an aptitude for it or an interest at all, there's almost no barrier to understanding like, oh, I really like this and I feel good in this. And since they understand, I feel like a lot of children very young have a very deep understanding of being able to connect to what makes sense. It makes sense this needs to be secured. It makes sense that we can do this because, and then some of them will look at it like, oh, this means that I can become a black hat hacker. Some will go that route, but there's a good number that still take it then as a very viable, needed thing and kind of take it as a passion.
I like the gamification angle because I think it fits in well, especially with like my son. He's not interested in cybersecurity at all. He's a mechanical kind of kid, which is fine, but he loves his games. And if you can introduce some of these concepts and gamify it for some of these kids at earlier ages, then I think that helps. So I think there are some interesting things there. I think there's a whole like new industry of cybersecurity games that somebody can come up with and help our younger folks get interested. I want to switch back to Jackie for a second. When we think about the enterprise side of this, what do we need to do at the enterprise level once you're out of school? How do we continue to encourage and develop diversity programs when we're in the industry or as we're coming into the industry? What are some of the things we need to do there?
Well, that's always a challenge, but it is one we can rise to meet. You know, as I was talking before about the unicorn problem, a lot of the different things that we're looking for in a given employee who can do everything is much more attainable if we look to find it in employees who can do something well and then need training or cross-training or mentorship to build their skills. And we need to invest in providing those kinds of opportunities. We also need to make sure that we publicize those opportunities where we're looking for individuals with certain characteristics or capabilities rather than, say, traditional experience. We can bifurcate our job postings, take someone who wants to do everything. For example, even at Domain Tools, we are actively working to correct this. We had a job description that we were putting out for a data architect for platforms. Now, that required initially a data architect who could do double duty as a platform architect with more than 9 years of Python experience. Data architecture and platform architecture can in fact be different things. You take that job description, you split it out into 2 roles with discrete characteristics. Or when you start looking at reviewing your job descriptions, look at the language you have, make them more acceptable, make them more desirable, make them feel more approachable. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You just have to be really good at critical thinking. Try to pull in people from different areas who may not have that. And then within an organization, really make a commitment to diversity and inclusion and equity. These things take time. They require investment from management. You have to introduce new, more junior employees to the field and then give them the skills, training, and most importantly, coaching they need to be successful and to build a career in the field. This doesn't happen overnight. As I mentioned earlier, everyone wants to have somebody come in and start excelling in the job on day one and doing the work of 5 people. That's not sustainable. If we want to truly build resiliency, we have to look for those individuals who are interested and passionate, and we have to help them build that interest and passion by making it seem like a viable long-term career choice. These are things we need to invest in and get better at. And it's not going to happen overnight. It only happens with commitment. We have to do things like unconscious bias training. I actually just had one yesterday. And it was a fantastic experience, but that highlights things like looking at your interview processes and examining how you can adapt them to be more accommodating to different communication styles and cultures. Part of it, as was said earlier, is the intimidation factor. There's no reason this has to be intimidating. Yes, it could be an ego trip, but that's not going to help us out in the long run. And we have to move away from it.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot about, having the skills, maybe not, you don't necessarily need the degree. We always talk about aptitude and attitude. And I think part of it is, how do we craft those job descriptions? What requirements do we put in them? Do they really need, 15 years of experience in AWS cloud when it's only been around maybe 15 years, right? Or do you need a master's degree, or not to knock Roger Williams or anything, Susan, but sometimes for certain jobs, maybe the degree's not required. And so if we build the job descriptions and the job posting better, then maybe we attract more people into our space.
Well, to go to your point, I think, in Jackie's as well, is if you do want to bring particularly more women into this industry, what generally happens is when women look at a job qualification list, they make sure that they meet 100% of it. where a man will apply for a job with maybe half of those characteristics. So the more requirements you build in, the more that females are going to filter themselves out. So right at the entry point there, if you have job descriptions, I think as Jackie mentioned, with all of those listings of degrees and years, and you're going to immediately lose a part of the workforce that you want to bring in because you do want to have different perspectives. So that entry point alone is really important. And on the tech side, you're in a really unique position that a lot of other industries are not, where you're able to build resume review processes that help to focus on skills and not an individual's demographic characteristics. And that also helps you to bring in people who have the skills you want and not rely on that model of, continuing to just create more of the same as what you have in your company. So I think, you're in a great position to bring in that better, broader pool that's going to really meet your needs and be a group that you can develop. So I think you're in a good spot there.
Gabe, I think I heard you chime in a little bit. I want to give you an opportunity to answer because you're also on the enterprise side as well.
The only thing I would add, because I agree wholeheartedly with every single thing that was said there. In fact, I think Mandy heard me repeat exactly some of those same things yesterday, right down to the resume requirements. You cannot have 8 years of Kubernetes experience. You can't have it. It doesn't exist. Take it off your resumes or off of your job requirements. It's not a thing. But there's that. There's the over reliance on certifications in some areas. But as someone who also builds technology, I think part of it is that we do not make it approachable enough. Part of the esoteric nature of what we do, or at least that perceived esoteric nature, on top of us wanting to think that we are a bunch of rocket surgeons, is that we make technology that does not allow for us to have entry-level skills enter the job. So folks at certain junctures start needing higher levels of skills just to be able to fulfill these roles, because we're still building technology that just does not meet those needs. A large part of that is a byproduct of the way we bring products to market. And so UX becomes oftentimes the last thing that is paid attention to. And by that point, the technology is matured. There's so many things that we can address just at the upfront of the tools that we even introduced to the space, and then everything else that the panel has said here so far, I would just double down on.
Great.
And
yeah, Mandy, go ahead. I don't want to forget you.
Well, thank you. To add to that, looking at things that I would adore to see enterprise level and entire industry wide would be reaching out and companies working very directly with their local vocational rehabilitation centers and with their centers for independent living, perhaps establishing ways to do internships that allow people who are either disabled and looking to return to work through a ticket to work program, or who are these specifically are more for disabled individuals, people with learning disabilities who are autistic like myself, different things, who are learning how to support themselves, who have mass amounts of latent skills. And these are the areas they get directed to, the vocational rehabilitation centers and the centers for independent living. So if at the enterprise level, you reach out to your local agencies like this and start networking very specifically so that the career counselors realize this is actually a career path they could look into. Start setting up internships, different things that allow people to perhaps keep their benefits that they need while slowly learning about the industry, and then they become a full-fledged employee. Those are some things that I would adore to see done.
All great suggestions. We could probably go on for another half an hour, but I'm going to try to keep this segment succinct. Jackie, Gabe, Mandy, and Susan, I want to thank you so much for joining me on Enterprise Security Weekly for this discussion.
You're welcome. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having us. It was wonderful.
Cheers.
Welcome. If anyone wants to attend Unlocked and watch Doug White's diversity panel discussion, Gabe and Mandy are on that as well. Please feel free to register for free by visiting securityweekly.com/unlocked. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and we'll see you next week on Enterprise Security Weekly.